I forgot what I was going to say. Well, I'll begin with a word or two about the great work. The great work of our times, briefly stated, is to move from a terminal Cenozoic period in the geobiological, cultural story of the planet Earth to the Ecozoic era. It's somewhat important that we understand where we are in relation to the deeper movements and shaping of the planet Earth and its biological, geological, and biological systems, because that is where the problem is at the present time. We're not in another period of historical change for humans or cultural modifications. If that were our problem, well, we would have a certain continuity with things that have happened previously in the human story. But what's happening now has no parallel in human history, nor does it have a parallel in the planet's history. This is, by all odds, a most unique moment in the 4.5 billion years of Earth history. So we are determining the destinies of the planet itself, and that is a rather momentous thing. The power that we have gotten from our empirical inquiry into the planet Earth is overwhelming. And until the present, we have been shielded from our total impact on the planet until we could come to our scientific understanding of the planet. But once we got the skills to deal with the chemistry of the planet, with the deeper structures of the planet, and it's all the way down to its nuclear configurations, then we had an enormous capacity. And this has changed the whole structure of the planet Earth. And we are still acting as though we were just in another historical moment that would pass and such things as that. But it's a crisis, though, not simply for modern humans or for the human community. It's a crisis for the trees. It's a crisis for the mountains. It's a crisis for the seas. It's a crisis for every living being on the planet and every non-living structure on the planet. So this is something that people very seldom come to appreciate. And this is where my own emphasis has been placed, to understand the order of magnitude of what we are about, because unless we have this change of mind, our structural changes will not ultimately be effective. There are three basic areas of functioning. The area of principles at stake, the area of strategies that we use, and the area of tactics. We need to do all the tactical things like recycling, using less energy from the fossil fuels. We need to to do all those things that we talk about in the immediate present. I say the 10,000 things we must do. But we can do a fair amount of all those and still not essentially and deal with the issue. Because the issue is deep in the mind, deep in the soul. It's deep in the total structure of Western civilization. Because Western civilization, this has been happening out of Western civilization. It did not happen out of a Buddhist world or a Hindu world or a Chinese world. It happened out of a world shaped by biblical, Christian, humanist, European formations. And so it is a sizable issue that we're dealing with. And we're dealing with the quintessence of Western way of life, our civilization, the quintessence of the religious issue. There's something wrong through the total structure from the biblical, Christian, humanist, Western development. There's something deeply and terribly wrong. And an evidence of it, of course, is the fact that the religious traditions are not responding in any significant way to the obvious devastation that we're into. Nor are our universities. Our intellectual establishment are fostering the difficulty rather than offering some way of dealing with the difficulty. So with the political, the legal, the jurisprudence that we live under, there's something terribly wrong, because that too is unable to come to deal with it, not simply because of a particular political regime, but there is in the total jurisprudence an inadequate sense of how human legal and political and governmental structures function. So I'll go on for a while, and we'll all be numb with the order of magnitude of what we're about. So, what do I propose then? What I propose is that nothing is going to be worthwhile if we don't take up the great work at its proper order of magnitude. And that is obviously something that we must initiate. I say, where can you go to find guidance? Well, there's no adequate place that I know of at the present time. I can suggest a lot of helping forces as regards the four great establishments that control our lives: the political establishment, the government, the intellectual establishment, the universities, the economic establishment, the corporation, the religious establishment, the church. But all four of these are involved in the devastation. And in that sense, if, as they say, you cannot find the answer exactly in the sources whence the problems emerge, but that's not entirely true, because you always must answer problems precisely at the root of whence the problem emerges. At this, but what I do want to establish is that if we do this, if we are going to significantly assist future generations to survive the awesome problems that they must deal with, but just think of what the next generation has to deal with. When I was born in 1914, there were less than 2 billion people on the planet. There are almost as many people will be in India in a few decades, there'll be as many people as there were on the entire planet when I was born. By the end of this decade or this century, there'll be 6 billion. The next generation is going to see 8 to 10 billion. Meanwhile, the petroleum supplies, everything we have is petroleum-based. Our food is petroleum-based, our clothes, our transportation, our energy systems, our plastics, it's all petroleum. But in the next generation, we'll see that at least 60 to 80% gone, and so that they have the problem. So, to come back to this idea of the great work, there is a calling to a great work. There have been great works before. Every generation has a great work. I don't think any generation or any people were faced with such a great work as we are presented with. There was the great work after the decline of Roman order, when the cities of Europe dissolved and life was carried on in the great castles and the great monasteries for over 6 centuries. From the 6th century to the 11th, through the 11th, on into the 12th century, when the cities of Europe began to, the new cities came into being and some of the others revived. But and a commercial economy came into being that had not existed prior to this time, and the monasteries began to develop. It was a period after it was the great period of the Irish carrying through the traditions of the classical world. It was only through their effort and their founding of the great monasteries and religious centers of Europe that the medieval ages came into being. But it was an awesome period. But there was a great work to be done. And it was the creation of the Middle Ages. And the story goes, it's a story that you've heard probably before several times, but the story of the 3 men carrying stones. And they were asked, first was asked, "What are you doing?" And they answered, "I'm carrying stones." And the second was asked what he was doing. He says, "Supporting my family." Third was asked, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm building a cathedral." And they're quite different. We're all carrying stones. We're all supporting families. But there's something more. And every civilization has this, or every people, or every age, or every generation. The person asked about this continent and asked what was the great work, and they conceived their great work as conquering the continent. But this idea of a great work and the idea of the historical moment when a people appears is something to reflect on. For instance, ourselves, I mentioned this once, that is speaking in Florida one evening to a fairly large group of people. And I mentioned the fact, I said something about the great work to be done. What I mentioned also is that history, or the universe, guides its course in very mysterious ways, and that any generation that's given a great problem is given a great mission, because we did not choose to be here at this time. We did not choose to be present in this transition, these transition decades of the second millennium and on into the opening decade of the third millennium. We did not ask to be here. We were put here. We were, in a sense, chosen. We don't need to go back to providential or divine choosing exactly. We can do it if we want to, but the universe itself chooses. There is a way in which the universe determines its destiny, and the first thing about being able to deal with it is to understand that we are chosen. That's always a basic thing. A person has it in the earlier periods, but the thing about being chosen is you're not asked. And that's both, should be a vote of confidence. Some people say, well, I wasn't consulted about it. Well, it's like the prophets in the Old Testament. So you're going whether you like it or not. And some prophets said, send me. Isaiah, I think, said, don't send me. Well, you're going. You got no choice. So we're here. We got no choice. But the powers that put us here are the powers that have to guide us, the powers that have to give us the vision, and the powers that have to sustain us. And it was quite striking in Florida the next morning. Mother came to me with her 9-year-old child, boy. Says, you know, this morning my son came to me and he says, very excited, he says, you know, Mama, I was chosen. I was chosen. He was excited about it. It was something for him to do. And he felt a certain capacity for it. So, in this sense, we are dealing with issues that, in a certain sense, is beyond me. I outline a problem of this nature. And the instinctive response has to be, that's a big assignment. But we cannot succeed if we do not understand the nature and the order of magnitude. And if we try to diminish that, if we try to answer it through a certain immediate tactics merely, we can't do without tactics. They're where the thing reaches its immediate efficacy and strategies. But basically, and that's where I think it's very important to realize how deep the problem is in our minds. Now, I came across something the other day on the Copernican revolution. What that meant, we kind of trivialized and said, well, those people rather absurd. And all this time they had this difficulty about appreciating this change. Weren't they silly people? They couldn't accept the evidence of things. But just think what it meant. The religion was based on it. Their whole way of life, governance, was based on the fact that the earth was the center, the solid center you could depend on. It was in the revelation. It was the basis of spirituality, the basis of morality. It was the basis of law. It was the basis of medicine. It was the basis of education. You couldn't think of anything that wasn't related to that feeling of security, that feeling of the order of things, the feeling of being secure, and of having the vision, the energy, and the capacity to deal with life, with all its difficulties, with all its natural catastrophes, with starvation at times, with the chill of winter and all that. But you could deal with it in a sense that accepting it as a part of the condition under which life is granted humans. Life is granted to us under some severe conditions, and part of this is a participation in the difficult aspects of any organism, of any structured or organic mode of being. Now, this was acceptable. It worked out. There was meaning. There was a sacrificial element in life. There was a painful element. But the problem wasn't exactly to do away with the pain, but to deal with it. It's why non-Western peoples don't, they deal with the problems of life by building up the interior capacity to deal with it, not with doing away with the problem. And a problem is a problem only in proportion to the capacity to deal with it. You can deal with the problem of pain or deal with the problem of a certain amount of the challenge of life, then life flows. I sometimes used to say, if you put a 10-pound rock in front of a group of people, I say, I put a rock there in the middle of us, and you bring in a 2-year-old child, well, the child can touch the rock and play around with it. The child grows older, grows to a mature state, and pick up the rock and throw it out the window. It's no problem with it. The child is a problem. Later, the issue hasn't changed, the person has changed. The person deals with it, and deals with it with certain ease. With ourselves, our problem is progressively magnified because we are further sensitized, because we haven't built up the interior capacity to deal with it. Now, this capacity to deal with our present situation is going to require an awful lot of transformation. But let me just say something about what the Copernican revolution. In our times, the change that's required of us is basic. And when I say that it's basic, just let me read something. This is a part of something that I wrote not long ago that had to do with an ecologically sensitive spirituality. I don't know, maybe before the weekend is up I could present it, but it would take a little time. It has to do with the historical role of America. The historical role of America is especially significant as something of a parable of the larger human process. For when that first tiny mast of a European ship appeared over the Atlantic horizon, every living being on the American continent might have shuddered with foreboding at what awaited it. These peoples from across the sea might have come to join the great community of life on this distant continent. They might have responded to the spiritual grandeur of the forests and rivers and woodland creatures, to the mountains and valleys with the reverence and wonder that were appropriate. They might have learned something of the spirituality appropriate to this land from the native peoples here. The difficulty with these people from across the sea, that they thought they already knew everything. They brought with them a book as a primary reference as regards reality and value. This book, I would say, while recognizing its vast spiritual significance, has caused endless difficulty, not only in America, but eventually in the larger community of all the living and non-living components of the great community that constitute the planet Earth. For validly or invalidly, it has served to block the spiritual understanding communicated to humans in the world of natural phenomena. The North American continent was ready to communicate a profound spirituality to the incoming peoples. The magnificence of its natural splendor and the grandeur of its forests and the beauty of its rivers and the abundance and variety of its wildlife, this continent still had something of its primordial vigor, something of the innocence that older civilizations had lost long ago. In all these ways, it was a more immediate manifestation of the divine than the incoming peoples had experienced for centuries. Yet, to have responded in any worthy manner to this all-pervasive presence of the spiritual world would have been considered as heretical, as unworthy of a people accustomed to experience the spiritual order of things in terms of the biblical world. This incapacity to enter into any significant rapport with the primordial world we might consider as the deep source of our present problems of spirituality and sustainability, because the spiritual dimension of this continent could not be responded to in any adequate manner. There was no proper reverence for the continent to mitigate the exploitation of the immense wealth that was available here. This alienation was further strengthened by the humanistic formation of Western civilization, which fostered the exaltation of the human throughout its education program. Both the spiritual and the humanist dimensions of Western tradition had only minimal concern for the natural world. Education that should be oriented toward deepening the intimacy of the human inhabitants with the larger Earth community and the comprehensive universe community was turned away toward the self-appreciation of the human and the exploitation of the non-human. This attitude was further strengthened by the Newtonian cosmology set forth in 1687 and so forth. What is so startling here is that the peoples of Europe, with all this background, considering themselves the apex or the final splendor of human development, religiously, intellectually, humanistically, artistically, they were the great people. And why is it that this, with all this background, that these people would be such a terror to the North American continent, that after they were here a relatively short time, the continent would be devastated? Now, this, a person might say, is one way of trying to rethink the entire Western endeavor, because the whole thing is there in this, I call it a parable, or something of a startling, something that we're hardly aware of. We still are not aware of it. We still are involved in the process. The church is still not protesting in any significant way at the greatest crime that humans are capable of, which is the devastation of the mode of divine presence. St. Thomas says that the order of the universe is the ultimate and noblest perfection in things. That's Summa Contra Gentiles, Book 2, chapter, I think, 46. Now, this sense that the universe carries the primary participation in and manifestation of the divine would, quite naturally, lead religious people to be very sensitive to what happens to the natural world about us, and to deal with it in some effective way, or at least to critique the forces that are exploiting it. But it was rather the other way as regards the destiny of religious people. They felt divinely commissioned to use the natural world. So that this difficulty, and it's something that will take a bit of time to explain just how that happened. But if we don't know how it happened, then this deep cultural pathology that we're into will just not have any adequate therapy. We are involved while we're creating our answers for the future. We must have the equivalent of a deep therapy of the past, because we are dealing with a profound cultural pathology. And if we don't understand what happened, we'll repeat it. We will not be secure against it. We must heal it in order to effectively get on with our creativity. Now, there's a balance between these. We don't need to be overly concerned with the difficulties that we've introduced, so that our creating of the future doesn't have the efficacy that it must have. We must create the future, and that is one way of critiquing the past. But intellectually, while we are creating the technical structures on into the future, we simultaneously need to know how to get on with the past. And we also need, in other aspects of life, we also need to say in jurisprudence. As long as the American Constitution, as now written, is our ultimate reference point, then the ecology movement doesn't have a chance, because our Constitution gives to humans the rights and the liberties and all those things that to exploit the non-human. So this brings up a question like that.